In this video, I'm going to explain how to choose between sharps and flats when you're writing your parts. The short answer is there's no short answer, but I'll do my best to explain how I choose to use sharps or flats. But before I get into that, if you like tutorials like this one, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Hit the thumbs up. The thumbs up is really, really important, I've been told. And also, please check out Patreon. Your support means a great deal, and it's helping me continue to do videos like this one. A question I've gotten over and over again is how to choose when to use sharps or flats. And that's really a matter of dealing with enharmonic pitches. So let me explain. So two notes are said to be enharmonic if they look different on the page, but they sound the same. So an example of that would be A sharp or B flat. When you're writing your parts, you're left with the choice of, do I use A sharp or do I use A flat? Which one's better? Well, on their face, they're both the same. There's no good choice between A sharp and B flat. And we'll get into that in a minute. But not all enharmonic pitches are created equally. So the ones that are not real pitches, like B sharp is the same as C natural, you should rarely use B sharp in your parts. And you should rarely use C flat. And you should rarely use E sharp or F flat. Those notes don't really exist, and it's just going to cause problems for your musicians when they're sight reading your parts. That's the easy part. The more difficult part is figuring out when to use sharps and flats when you're actually copying a part for a thing you've arranged. So let's look at some examples, and that'll help you understand my thought process when going through this. The first thing I keep in mind is trying to use the fewest number of cymbals. That seems like a silly distinction to make, but if your part is cleaner and has fewer things on the page, it will look like it's easier to play, and your players will have an easier time reading it. So here's an example. So in this, it's some chromatic quarter notes. B, A sharp, A. Now that could be written as B, B flat, A. And that's how you should always do it. Now, I'm going to take this a step further. And now I've heard people talk about if you're in a flat key, you should use flats. And if you're in a sharp key, you should use sharps. And that's true a lot of the time for the thing we just talked about. If you're in a key signature that has an E flat in it, you generally shouldn't use a D sharp in your part because it could be written as an E flat without additional symbols because the key signature takes care of it. So it sort of goes into the same logic. But looking back at our example, if this were in the key of G, which is 1 sharp, F sharp, I would still write it as B, B flat, A, when it's a descending chromatic like this, as opposed to B, A sharp, A natural, even though that would be using a sharp in a sharp key. So it's not as simple as that. Now I'm going to put a piece of music on the screen, and I want you to try to sight read it in your head. Here you go. All right, so I wager that a lot of you misread this. The problem is it's a C sharp going to an E flat. It should look like this, C sharp going to D sharp. Now, there's a few problems. The first one is that D sharp is in the key signature, so it should just be a D sharp. The second one is that C sharp going to D sharp sounds like a second and looks like a second. C sharp going to E flat sounds like a second and looks like a third, and that's a problem for most musicians. All right, let's look at another example. Take a look at this one. All right, so this is a similar problem to the last one. You probably misread it when you were going through. It's F sharp, A flat, B natural, C sharp, which is crazy. And the problem is the F sharp to the A flat looks like a third but sounds like a second, and then the A flat going to the B looks like a second but sounds like a third. So it's much better like this. Boop. All right. Let's talk about another consideration, which are those accidental notes that don't really exist, like E sharp and so on. So in this case, this example includes a B sharp. So this I'll call it a fringe example of what I would do. So in this case, I've written a G sharp major triad arpeggio as a melody on this staff. So there it is. You can see a B sharp, but we should avoid this. So let's see what happens if we change it to a C natural. Notice this introduces new problems. So now we've got a G sharp up to a C natural, which sounds like a third but looks like a fourth. Then a C natural up to a D sharp, which looks like a second but sounds like a third. This is actually worse than having the B sharp. So this is sort of a case for the B sharp, but in fact, this is how I would write it. In this case, I've chosen to use enharmonic pitches for the entire phrase. So in order to avoid that B sharp, I've made it into a C natural, but then changed all the notes around it so that it reads like an A flat major arpeggio. Now, from experience, I've found that instrumentalists have a much easier time reading this A flat major arpeggio that doesn't include a B sharp in it than the earlier example that had way fewer cymbals but had a B sharp. Now, just as a test, I'm going to put a melody on the screen and give you a second to try to figure out what the problem is. Here you go. All right, so what's going on here is we have a descending A-flat triad arpeggio, and then an F sharp. So if you were sight reading this, you probably, even knowing that you're in the key of 4 sharps, the musician's going to play an F natural on the end of 3, and it is an F sharp. So here's what it should look like. This is actually much better. The number one most important thing when you're deciding which enharmonic pitch to use when you're copying a part is to make sure that the intervals look how they sound. So if it's a second, it should sound like a second and not a third. If it looks like a fourth, it should sound like a fourth and not a third, etc. So that's about all I have to say about this. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit subscribe. Please click through to the Patreon. By the way, I'm taking private students. If you're interested in arranging lessons, my email is in the description. And until next time, goodbye.